Well, welcome back, everybody, to another podcast day with Magnus and I. And if you're watching here on YouTube, you're going to see that we got the dress code underway today with a matching Kona hat. So always fun to kind of pop on these video calls and see more both dressed in. And today is with our Kona hats matching, representing the Kona brand there in Sweden. So anyways, today we're super stoked about today's podcast episode. We're going to be going through a list of questions today, and the main topic being, what are the benefits of incorporating indoor SUP into your weekly training for stand-up paddle boarding? So that kind of be the main topic we talk about in today's podcast episode, and just answering a list of questions that kind of go along with this topic. But a while back, when I was thinking about questions to ask Magnus here, one of the things that he pointed out to me a few months ago that kind of sparked some thoughts in my brain of how what I do with my body affects my paddling was this concepts of your neck alignment and how where you position your head or where you're looking with your eyes and things like that can affect even your spine and the rest of your paddle stroke. So I know many of us, we probably have heard the importance of keeping our spine straight to make sure we have good posture and form through a paddle stroke. But a lot of us, myself included, I think we forget that the way we position our neck also can affect that. So Magnus, like, what are your thoughts behind this topic? I know you're the one who kind of pointed this out to me in my paddle stroke. So why is it so important to be focused on our neck alignment?
There's actually a lot of reasons, and I've worked with this in so many areas and see how it actually affects performance. And if we look at our, general posture, I like to call it an open posture, because when we're in that posture that we're more or less designed to be in, then we open up the body so everything inside the body can work as it should, meaning like the digestive system, your diaphragm, everything can work as it should. So that's why we need to keep that posture. And if we, or I can take it this way instead, because we're today, as we, how we work today, we usually look down. We have something in front of us, like a computer or whatever, and we look down. That means that we do that most of the time today. So the brain has actually shut off some of our eye muscles. So today we will have a hard time to look up with our eyes, meaning that instead of being able to look up, we tilt the head backwards. And when we do that, we overarch the lower back, for instance. And that will, in that time, at the same time, affects a lot of how we move. So when we overarch, for instance, we will have a problem with using the diaphragm in the right way. We have a problem with stabilizing the core with our abdominals and so on. So everything is connected, so there's a lot of effects that will be missing if we're not keeping the neck in line with the spine. And if we also want to work with gravitation and body weight to drive the paddleboard, if the head is tilted back, we lose a lot of our own body weight over to the paddle. So if the head is, in line with the spine, or the neck is in line with the spine, then we get more body weight onto the paddle, and therefore more power.
Yeah. So with that concept, I know for a lot of paddlers, when they're going for a paddle session or even a race, they tend to kind of lock their eyes into one position, whether it's the front of their board or a few feet in front of their board, maybe on the horizon. So they're focused on that and they're doing paddle strokes. Would you say it's good to do that, or is it better to have your neck kind of move up and down with your spine versus keeping your eyes and your eyesight moving as well, versus keeping your eyes locked into one position? What are kind of the effects of that?
Yeah, when we train, everything should be, conscious. We should be aware of what we're doing when we train. In a race, we will not have to think on all these things. So the best is to be able to scan everything around us. that is the best thing, because then we will realize what's happening on the sides of us instead of just looking down at the nose of the board and we don't realize it's coming a wave or another paddler and so on. So one thing that we can do when we train is that we move our head to the sides all the time. So we can look at one side, keep paddling, and look at the other side, and keep paddling. And that's quite hard because like you can train this on land. If you stand on one leg, for instance, and then you turn your head left or right, or up and down and so on, you will find how difficult it is to keep the balance. Because nowadays we're more or less trained to use our vision or have a fixed point as a balance reference. So that means that also when we are bent forward, the brain thinks that we're about to fall. And when we're about to fall, we fixate on the ground ahead of us for us to be, what's happening here? What can I hit or something like that? So that's the reflex behavior that we have on the board. So we're bent forward, we look down on the nose usually, and that will help us keep the balance, but it will not help us to be an effective paddler.
So as we're hinging forward, then I think one of the things I try to work on as well these past few months is trying to keep my neck more in line with my spine. But with that, obviously, as I'm hinging down and up, since my head is also going with the same movement of my spine, I have found I have to move my eyes quite a bit more in terms of like looking more up. The more like the more I hinge forward, obviously, the more I have to look up with my eyesight to still see where I'm headed or my balance or things like that. So is that kind of technique you're saying then? Just kind of using more of our eyeballs then and less moving our neck?
I usually do that, doing eights, meaning you did do like pivot turns. So you go and do like a right pivot turn, and then you go back and do a left pivot turn. So you always look at the buoy you're aiming for. So soon as you start doing the turn, you turn your head and look at the other buoy. So that's a really good exercise, and that's what we need to do to be able to, enhance the performance in a race or whatever. Because you don't want to be, you don't want to be dependent on to look at something specific. That will be a problem. So most of the times training, it's better to put a wetsuit on and be prepared to fall in instead of I don't want to fall in, and then that will state your behavior more or less.
Now I can relate with that one. There's a lot of times I go in the water for a paddle session and the water's a little chilly. I just mentally put in my mind already, don't want to fall in today. I don't want to fall in today. But like you said, with that, we do limit ourselves in terms of the movements we do on our paddle board because we're more worried about falling versus actually applying the technique we need to on our paddle board. So that's definitely one area I still myself struggle in a lot of times. Like I should just jump in right now, get over that shock, and then I'll be good the rest of the session.
Yeah. Have a really good warm-up exercise is that you paddle 10 stroke on your left side, and then you jump in on your left side, go under the board up on the right side, take 10 strokes on the right side and jump in on the right side and going up, and do that for 10 times. That's perfect.
I can see that.
Quite a hard session.
Oh man. Maybe I'll do that when the water's just a tad bit warmer here for summertime.
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny. That's the only thing I do find.
You can race someone at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be fun. Actually, a fun little competition. Paddling, jumping in, swimming. That's a good cardio workout.
That would be the hardest you ever done, actually.
Yeah, no, I believe that. Oh my goodness. That would be a sight to see. Cool. Well, this first question I got for us today in terms of this topic of the benefits of incorporating indoor SUP into our training is this one's kind of for you as well. Is like, how often do you train with indoor SUP? And obviously, it will probably depend on the time of year, maybe, or maybe depends on your goals that you have for paddle boarding. But personally, for you, how often do you train with indoor SUP? And then, along with that question, how often would you recommend someone else to use indoor SUP?
At the moment, I actually do every other session indoor. So I do normal outdoor paddling one day, and usually the next day I do an indoor. If I don't really want to focus on train something specific on the water. But usually I try to do the same things that I've discovered on the water. What's happening with my body? What can I control or not? And then try to look at that more in detail when I use the indoor SUP. So, but I would say that when I don't have time, for instance, to do two sessions a day, like going out do sessions on the water, I can easily do one indoors and one on the water. That's much more effective than usually earlier I did go out really early in the morning and do one session, or really late at in the evening to do the next session.
Yeah, for
And
most people, that's hard to do, obviously, with time wise.
yeah, and if you're an elite paddler, you usually do like at least three training sessions a day. And that means that's perfect to do one indoor SUP, and that you can do it as a low intensity work.
No, exactly. So would you say for an average person who's just does an occasional race, there's kind of an like not an elite paddler, but not a beginner paddler, just kind of like in the middle, but they still want to improve on their skills and stuff. Would you recommend that they still do indoor SUP a few times a week, or how often would you recommend that kind of person to use it?
Absolutely, I would definitely say, depending on what you're at, what stage you're in. If you just have started up, I would be on the water most of the time, because then you don't haven't really realized what inhibits you on the water, or how you move and so on. There's so many things to start learning there. If you from the beginning want to know about what muscles you will be using on water and so on, and really train that, then you definitely can use the indoor SUP. So and if you have a hard time to or feel your body, a lot of people actually have that. They're not very conscious about how they move their bodies. And that's a shame, actually, because the body's it's as important as our brain, because our brain wouldn't work if we didn't have our bodies. So and I think most people will enjoy the progress of developing their own bodies, and get more comfortable with their bodies, and see how they work, how like-sided they are, and so on, and what they actually can engage or activate one specific muscle. You can make your ears like fluttering and so on, if you train at it. So and it's so low resistance. So when you do like rehabilitation training, then you can do it every day. So you can do indoor SUP every day if you need to, and if you find it interesting. So it will more or less help you, instead of be too demanding and so. So especially if you feel or see that you can't really move in a specific way, then you can definitely use the indoor SUP as much as you want.
And
that
yeah,
will
some good advice there. So someone who definitely needs to work more on water skills. Obviously, you can only do those skills on the water, but for those obviously who are ready to start learning the parts of their paddle stroke and the muscles, and it's great starting incorporating indoor SUP. And yeah, it's great, like you said, that's what's great about indoor SUP is that since it's such low resistance, so if say we have time for 2 workouts, you can also do a harder workout in the water and then
Yeah.
do a lower workout with to focus on targeting muscle groups or technique with indoor SUP. And so it's a great balance. And like I
Yeah.
said, I think it's just an individual trying to figure out what their goals are, what they need to work on, and adapting their workout schedules around it. But I know for a lot of people who work full-time jobs, sometimes it's hard to find the time to load their board up, drive out to the water, get a session on, drive back. Like for me right now, it takes like 3 hours to tell my wife the other day, like since I
Yeah.
moved here to Washington, I'm a little bit further from the water now.
Mm.
So like just to get like an hour 20 session in on the water, like I need 3 hours total just to get the whole process done of loading, driving, loading back kind of a thing. And so there's some days too where I find it's nice just to have the convenience of indoor SUP right at my fingertips in my house, where the only time I need is to just grab that thing and start working on my session and then hang it up and then start the rest of my day kind of a thing. So it's a great, I think, a tool for a lot of people to use who maybe are more limited in terms of time where they can't maybe get to the water until the weekend, or maybe they can only do one water session time a week. The indoor SUP is that great compromise to still get the technique they can work on their paddling and stuff, but
Yeah.
without the time constraints, was I think a huge benefit to indoor SUP.
Yeah, and what we've seen is so time effective in that way. We always say that stand-up paddling is very time effective as a training activity, because it trains our whole being, more or less. And the same with indoor SUP, then, is that we can focus in on specific things. That meaning that when we learn to focus on these things, when we get back on the water, we can still focus on these things on the water, instead of taking everything in. Or it's the weather looks like that and the water looks like that and so on. So
Hmm.
it's much easier to control yourself on the water when you have used the indoor SUP before.
Hmm. So kind of along those same lines then, for yourself and maybe someone else who's using indoor SUP, what are some of the benefits that you've seen or that other people will see when they use indoor SUP? Like for those who maybe are just starting to use it as well, like what are some benefits they can expect to see by using indoor SUP?
There's actually, because last year I started focusing much more, doing specific testing of the indoor SUP to see what's happening, and what we could learn from it, or what I could learn from it from the beginning. And there's so many things that I've discovered that I
Hmm.
didn't have a clue of before, actually. And I thought I was, I had good balance. I was quite light-sided. I was, had a good technique and everything. But realizing this when you're standing on this firm surface, and you just have this rubber band to work against, you realize quite soon that, okay, there's a lot I have to work with. And being on water, we can never really detect these things, because we compensate with the whole body just to stay balanced on the board. So therefore, it's very difficult to detect, and actually to develop these things. So the first I did discover was that I could much easier focusing on finding specific muscles, and then I could go back on the water and try to do exactly the same movements there. And sometimes I felt I could, and sometimes I felt I couldn't. So then I just had to go back again indoor, try to see, okay, what's happening here? Can I do some changes, and then go back out again and see if it happens? And that's been very interesting, and that's what I still keep doing right now.
Hmm.
And the benefits we'll see beyond that, for instance, is that we learn to understand our own bodies. We learn to understand how we shift the pressure on our feet. If you're paddling on the left side, for instance, we usually shift the body weight to the left. And that means that we're tilting the board, and the board will go to the right, and so on. So we learn more how to control the board when we're paddling. So the board will be flatter on the water. So it's more or less kind of a trimming. You trim the board. We call it this plane in front of it, call it that frontal plane. And the plane that goes to the side of us is the sagittal plane. So if you look at all these things, we can see how we're moving in these planes. So looking at the frontal plane, if the shaft is too angled to the side, the board will, if it's angled to the left, we turn to the right. And if we tilt the board to the left, we turn even more to the right. And that these two things combined will, we will paddling like this all the time. So Indoor SUP can help us control this much better. It also helps us to, learning how to change stroke rates, because we can easily paddling, like usually in the different gears we use in stand-up paddling, we're start around like 35 strokes per minute. For some individuals, that will be their distance stroke rate, and that usually up to 60, or for some people even 70 strokes per minute. And then we have the second gear, and then we usually go 80 to 100, or 60 to 80 usually strokes per minute. And then we have gear 1, which is the acceleration gear, or the highest or lowest gear but the highest stroke rate, and that will be like 80 to 100 plus strokes per minute. So that we can easily train with the Indoor SUP, much more easy than we can do on water. And most people, especially if the conditions getting more challenging, we drop down in stroke rate. We straighten the bodies, we get more passive, and we drop down in stroke rate. So many people, especially in the beginning, they just have one gear. And the hardest thing, actually what we need to do to increase our average speed, is being able to accelerate and change tempo. And that means changing stroke rate usually. So that you can train in Indoor SUP. So there's so many more things that we could train with Indoor SUP. And usually what is the most fun, I think, I don't know other people here, but for me is that I discover so many things about myself when I use the Indoor SUP. That will be that affects me on water.
Yeah, I agree with a lot what you're saying as well. And my time of using it the past few months, it's kind of like you said, more of like a refining tool for our paddling experience in the water, a way to come back and work on those key details to refine our stroke to be even more efficient, or to redefine our form to be in better posture as well. So yeah, it's super great about Indoor SUP. And so kind of with that as well, how long do you usually do an Indoor SUP session for? I know some people who maybe just start using it as well don't know if they should just use it for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour or more. How long do you usually recommend an Indoor SUP session to last for?
I would say it depends. I always say it depends, because everything depends on something. But in this case, I think that the most important thing with Indoor SUP actually is that we, instead of being on water, we are forced to focusing on keeping our balance. That's how we work. So that means that the conditions and the environment will take our focus. But Indoor SUP, it's we ourselves that needs to keep focusing on something specific. That will help us on water to be much more effective on water, and it will be so much more fun on the water, because when you decide what to focus on, you forget about everything else. So conditions that would seem challenging for you doesn't feel that challenging when you focus on something else. So I would say that as long as you can keep concentration or focus, that's how long you should train with Indoor SUP. Meaning that for most people that not used to train their concentration ability for longer periods of time, they maybe do it for some seconds, meaning that okay, I do 5 repetitions on the left side with focusing on this. If you can keep focusing on doing this exactly the same way for 5 times, that's good. And then as you progress, you can do it for maybe 10 times, then 20 times, and so on. And then you can do it for, I would say, an hour, because it's around an hour we actually can, most humans can be focused, not more actually.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started using it too, I started off, I think I was going by 30 minutes per session on the Indoor SUP. And at first too, I was like, didn't have like a metronome or anything to keep me on track in terms of stroke rate. But I found too, later on, to help me go in the longer sessions to be more engaged and focused is using a metronome. And I think it's something you recommended me to use as well, just by having that constant clicking of the metronome to keep me on my stroke rate. So I have it set for I have some set for 40 strokes per minute, some set for 50, 60, and so on. So whatever I'm focusing on, even just doing a technique, I'll still put it on a certain repetition for the metronome just to keep me focused for that longer period of time. And then obviously if I'm focusing even just specifically on stroke rate, also it keeps me on track for that as well. But I found that too, by doing that, along with, like you said, dividing up the session into terms of like 30 strokes on one side or 30 strokes on the other side, or even up to like 60 strokes on one side, 60 the other side. By doing that and counting through that number every single time on that side with the metronome and then switching sides and starting over again, it just helps the brain, I think, to break it down into segments that you can kind of handle focusing and doing that for a longer period of time. So I found by doing that, I can do a much longer session, like an hour-long session, and like it flies by. Some people I think might be intimidated by that at first, thinking, how can you do the same repetition over and over again for an hour long? And like they said, like just that attention span just seems crazy to think about. But when you break it up like that, the time flies by. Like you kind of get in that zone and you're just counting along with repetitions. You're focused on moving through the movements and the time flies by. But I think, like you said, important step for those who want to add more time to the session, for example, by doing those things like that can help break it into segments to allow them to do that for a longer period of time. Because if you're just jumping on the Indoor SUP and throwing on a podcast and just doing some motions, like for one, you're going to lose focus. The podcast probably help you maybe do it for a longer session because you'll be focused on the podcast. But or even if you're just listening to nothing in a quiet room or to music, like your sessions can be much shorter because, like you're saying, you kind of lose that focus of what you're actually doing there in the first place.
What I actually realized was that focusing on something, it took me maybe 20, 30 minutes into the session when I started to realize things about what I did. So just, doing something for too short of time will maybe not, take you where you need to be. So that actually is a good thing. It takes a while, and I've talked to some people early here, and what I realized it become for me was like a movement meditation, more or less, because I got into that rhythm and that sound of the metronome and all these things, and suddenly 1.5 hours was gone. I was so into these sessions, and in the beginning, I used a mirror in front of me just to be able to see that I kept my body in the right positions through the whole motion. But later, I start to take that away, and I turn the lights off and I close my eyes and just follow the metronome. And I was, 1.5 hours just went by. So it's just the metronome stopped, and I know, okay, that was 1.5 hours.
But it's better stop and go to bed now.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Especially the longer session part too. Like I noticed for myself, like same thing. Once I got to the 20-minute, 30-minute mark, that's when I started to notice things in my stroke, or my technique that needed to be tweaked or worked upon because I just need that time of repetition and repetition and getting that zone to really focus on the even finer details of that as well. And I noticed too, especially with training indoor SUP, and I think a big misconception about indoor SUP as well is some people want to use it for a cardio workout. Some people think they'll jump on the bands and get a good cardio exercise from it. And that's a concept I kind of took into it as well when I first was introduced to it by you guys. I was like, all right, this would be another good way to kind of burn some more calories with using indoor SUP. But obviously quickly realizing that was not the case. And that indoor SUP, even though we are focusing on technique and form, it is a great tool to use for the lower zones of heart rate zone training. So why is it important to still incorporate solid time into the lower zones of your heart rate training and not always being focused on the higher zones? And
Yeah.
is it limited? Is it on the water as well? Is it possible to do lower zone training or is it more difficult? So kind of talk about the heart rate zone training and why it's beneficial to use the lower zones for indoor SUP session.
Yeah, I can tell you it was the same when we developed these SUP ergometers, with air wheels and stuff like that. We tried to simulate the stroke on the water and the same type of load and everything, so it should feel the same. But so that means that you could do that and burn a lot of calories, and you can, have probably a good zone 2 or zone 3 session. You can even do harder sessions than that and so on. But we realized that even if that was, it was not on the water and you don't needed it to have a stable surface or in stable surface and so on, it didn't really give the effect that we wanted, because what we've seen on different water sports like kayaking or canoeing or rowing and so on, it's very, very hard to have or train in the lowest zone or zone 1. The lowest zone, I call it, this is Norwegian system that I use. And zone 0 there is just, standing on the board, being on water and not train. You just adapt to the environment. But zone 1 is between 55 and 72% of your maximum heart rate. That means that here we build mitochondria, like the power plants in every cell that helps us, create energy and so on. And also capillarization, meaning that we get more blood circulation, we get more capillaries in the working muscles, meaning that if you're not used to using your shoulders for hours at a time and so on, they will be hurt because they don't get enough oxygen and nutrition. So by just moving your shoulder for a long period of time will help you get more capillaries to these muscles. So, but usually in water sports, we cannot train in that zone. If we want to do use a good technique, we're already up in zone 2 and zone 3 because it's too demanding because of the unstable surface and everything. So that means that most of these sports train their zone 1 in other activities like cycling or hiking or running and so on. But so for me, if you go for if you have a working time like a competition over like 10 minutes, you will do about 80% of all your training in zone 8. That means that's if you do 1,000 hours a year, that's 800 hours in a different activity that you're actually training for. And that's been a problem. So, but with Indoor SUP, instead of actually the ergometers itself, we could be in that, do that. So with fully focusing on exactly what we want to do on the water. So here we can have both things, because as I said, I think before in an earlier episode, was that I've been doing like 90 strokes per minute for 1 hour and I'm still in zone 1. And if I if I did that on the water, I would last like for 1 minute or something. Yeah.
Yep, I totally yeah.
So
It's so true, like you said, like the indoor SUP works with lower zones that are the hard to get in the water, because like you said, just the demanding qualities of our body to paddle, like I said, in good form in the water requires just more effort. Especially too that for most people around the world, more than the half of their paddle sessions are going to be in unideal conditions in terms of there being some wind, some chop, some boat wake, some things happening on the water and in the weather that requires them to exert more force, just to do the same thing they're doing on a flat, calm day. So, yeah, if would say like for especially those days when the waters are unideal in terms of paddling on for a lower zone, it's almost next to impossible, like you said, at all, to keep your heart rate in a lower zone for those paddle sessions as you're exerting more effort just trying to even paddle straight. Um, so I would say rarely do you get a lower zone like zone one, especially paddle session in, unless it's super glassy calm on the water and you already have good performance training, then maybe you can keep your heart rate in a lower zone. Um, so kind of with that as well, I think we're kind of seeing that you need to have a balance in terms of training on the water and off the water with indoor SUP in terms of kind of hitting the heart rate zones you want to hit for the type of training you want to focus on. Um, so you say that it's important then to kind of have a balance then of training both on the water and off the water, or are there certain times should be more focused on one versus the other?
when we're working with, controlled progression, like we use periodizations, meaning that you train different things during different periods. That meaning that we want to time our best shape for a competition or something. That means that you can divide this. But if you want to, if you're at the beginning of your career in stand-up paddling, it's better to focus on being training in all the zones all the time, more or less, because that will help you in the long run. Because it could be, very demanding to, just be paddling in the lower zone for like 3 months. The only thing you do, and for elite paddlers, that's more or less between 3 hours to 6, 8 hours a day in that low zone. So that could be, quite hard if you're not used to it. So being able to see how and what we do now, it's called SUP screening. We do the test with elite paddlers, like the field tests. We want to see what you paddle in specific distance, and then we want to see if you go all out for 200 meters, what will your stroke rate be and what will your heart rate be, and so on. And we do that for 1K, we do that for 10Ks, we do that for 30 meters, and so on. So the SUP screening is the light version of that. And that can help you to, you always, or at least maybe every third month or something, you check yourself out. Okay, what's happening with have I lowered my stroke rate and increased my speed and so on in this heart rate? So that is a good thing, and that could help you with the indoor SUP, for instance, could help you specific if you see that, okay, when I go all out for 100 meters, for instance, I usually, tend to wear off the course and everything. Then I could, go back indoors, try to see if keep my body more stable. So it's better not to. It's better to be in somewhat control, meaning that when you go all out, you're not effective. But when you're at your sub-maximum level, that's where you can perform your best. So that means that if I go all out, for instance, okay, I see that I have 100 stroke rates of 100 SPM. But if I lower that to like 90, I will go much faster. That's all these things we detect, and all these things we can actually work with in Indoor SUP. If you see that, okay, this is my problem here. Okay, how can I train that in a controlled manner to make it better?
Yeah, so with that as well in the heart rate zone training, say like for myself for example, if I'm training for let's say a 10K race in 3 months time, I'm imagining if I was doing myself, I'd probably plan some more time with indoor SUP towards the beginning of those months in terms of more time training the lower zones. And obviously as the race gets closer, training the upper zones, which would require more time on the water. Is that kind of what you're saying as well, or would you recommend something different in terms of that kind of a rough timeline for a goal?
Yeah, yeah, it always depends how much time you have before the race. So if it's short amount of time, and we're talking here, like 3 weeks or something, if you have like 3 months, then you can have a periodization in these 3 months, more or less, that you have like 1.5 months with base training, with a lot of paddling volume and being out there and just get into the rhythm of training. And then you increase the speeds and the heart rate zones. So the closer you get to your goal, the more you've been in the higher zones, getting more adapted to how it feels to be very, very tired when you're paddling.
So you're saying too, it could be very beneficial then using the indoor SUP more often towards the beginning of that time frame to train the lower zone even as well, or
Yeah,
no?
what we realized is that when we're closing into our goal, more or less, or to this competition, it's actually usually tapering. What's called is when we drop down in how much we train. We keep the intensity up, but we don't do as many sessions that we did in the beginning. But here instead, you can get a really, really effective and very, very good recovery by incorporating the indoor SUP between these really intense and hard sessions.
Yep, I
So
agree with that. I
especially
noticed that. Yeah, I noticed with my own training as well. Like if I do a hard session in the water one day, like a threshold training, the next day is a great day to do indoor SUP training because it's a good recovery tool, but also still continue to work on the things I need to work on.
yeah. And the good thing with indoor SUP, as I see as well, is that if we have overused some part of the body, it's very, very good to get the circulation back and stabilize that part again. So it gets much more recovered much faster actually when using the indoor SUP.
So another question I have as well, in terms of indoor SUP, I think we kind of hit on earlier also in this conversation is indoor SUP, will it help someone increase their mobility in terms of say they're lacking in mobility in some side of their body, or maybe they're lacking mobility in their shoulder? Will indoor SUP kind of help increase that mobility, or will it not?
It will definitely, if we use it in the right way. And been working with a lot of athletes through the years in different activities and sport and so on. We've seen that especially after injuries, we have a lot of scar tissue and so on in the tissue. And then we usually think that, okay, we have to stretch that and so on to get it more flexible again. And we more or less forced the body into a specific position, or the limb in a specific position. But what we realized was that this is not this is not from indoor SUP, but that's why it's so good to use indoor SUP for this. Because if I can move my right side, my right arm very long to that side, but my left is, it stops here. So here, if I just go to where I can move it more to the side, I stop there. And by doing repetitions to this end position, the brain will realize that it will not get hurt if it let go. And so more and more we will be able to get more mobility based on just keep doing that. So we don't have to do it the same way on both sides. in the beginning. Just keep doing it as far as you can on the side you have problems with, and that will open up gradually.
Now, kind of similar to as well, I think, is stretching. When you first get into a stretch, say you're sitting down, you're reaching for your toes, that first few seconds, you can't reach very far. Your body's tight as well. It just doesn't, your brain doesn't want it to adapt or ease all the way into your full stretch. But as soon as you ease up and then go back into it again that second time or the third time, you're going to be able to reach further and further. I think it's kind of the same process with you're saying the repetition of mobility, even with our shoulders, for example, as you're talking about. The more repetition we do, the more our body will allow us to ease into that and increase our range of motion as well. So something definitely I've seen
And if you think about it, when this is unconscious behavior again, I work with something called evology that we focus on these things. And so when we're trying to do a movement that we're not really capable of, you see that, okay, oh, this was hard, and you stop breathing because your brain focusing, okay, I cannot go further because then I risk to injure myself. So that reflex will stop you from being, but as soon as you relax and focus on your breathing and your exhale, for instance, then you can start moving, because then you shifted this reflex. So then you can move much better again. This is the first response, actually, keeping the body composed, so it will be safe.
So with that as well, for the indoor SUP, is indoor SUP a good tool even to increase strength in terms of our paddling muscles that we use for on the water? So also we talked about before, like we're not using super heavy bands. We're not going for like, let's say someone goes to the gym, they're looking to do three sets of like 12 reps each set kind of a thing, and then maxing out maybe the last set. We're not doing that with indoor SUP. But even though we're using lighter bands, can you still improve your strength with indoor SUP or not?
Indoor SUP is strength training, but in the right way, meaning that we train every time you activate the muscles. It will, it will start to adapt more or less. Okay, this is what I need to do, and gradually, the more we do it, the more the brain finds a pattern that it sees, okay, I have to do this over and over again, and therefore it starts to adapt to that. That meaning that all these minor muscles, the stabilizing muscles and so on, that we're not usually training, that's what we train here. So, for me, doing a 1 hour session of indoor SUP with, like the red resistance band, I'm dripping of sweat because I focus on keeping my body exactly in the same position. So if I do something on my right side, for instance, the rest of the body, I have to keep exactly in the same position. So all these muscles have to work all the time to keep that position. And that is very, very hard. But, we don't really think about strength training in these ways. We think it should be very, just lifting something heavy. That is strength training. But, standing on one leg, that's strength training. And that's also endurance training. I have in the demand analysis for stand-up paddling, I said that we should be able to stand on one leg and close our eyes for 3 minutes. And when you do that, you will start to feel how your calves gonna ache or lactate, because all these muscles have to work all the time to keep you upright and keep your balance. So if you can do it for 3 minutes, you're very good. My record
funny little
is
challenge to try.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so right. And yeah, I think it's a lot of time you have a misconception of what strength training is. And there's definitely still a time and place for sure for doing the heavier lifting and training those types of muscles as well. Like, we're not saying don't do that for sure. But it's cool that even though you're doing indoor SUP with using a lightweight band, you're still going to increase your strength, which is awesome. And so that's what's like
Especially
so great about it.
your, yeah, you know, what we train mostly here is joint stability, meaning that the joint, stabilizing a joint, meaning that the muscles around that joint need to be stronger. That's why we collapse now. It's because they're not trained enough. That's why we, twist our ankles and everything, and so yeah. So just staying in this, try to staying in the same position for a longer period of time is strength and endurance training at the same time.
Yeah, those are all super, awesome things to think about and discuss from today's discussion, or talk about from today's discussion as well. And I think kind of last question I have to kind of wrap things up from today, it takes a little bit of detour as well, is obviously it's summertime or going into summertime for many of us paddlers around the world. So for many of us, we'll be spending a lot of time on the water, enjoying the warmer days and the warmer water also. And so with that as well, I think we talk about the importance of balancing obviously with on the water training with off the water training with indoor SUP.
Yeah.
But for the winter season, for many people, they can't access the water because usually it's frozen over or it's too cold, and paddling is just not an option. I know for you this past winter, you spent several months just using indoor SUP. So would you say during the winter months when people have less access to water, was indoor SUP, from your personal experience, a good tool to use during your winter months? And do you feel like you were able to kind of maintain a better base for going back on the water again? In comparison to previous years where maybe you didn't use indoor SUP and you did other forms of training, but went back on the water again in the summertime. What was kind of your experience of using that over the winter months? And would you recommend people to use it during the winter months?
I can say it like this because for like 15 years now, I've been paddling and mostly all year round. And this year was the first time I just focused on indoor SUP. I did it for maybe 5 to 7 times a week for 4 months in a row. And that was, how I work is I like to test things. I want to experience how it feels actually. And so I just decided at the first, I usually try things for 3 months, but there were so many things that I discovered with indoor SUP. So I said, okay, I go for one more month. So I did 4 months. And getting back on the water, my first session on the water was actually 26 Ks. And it felt I was never off the water. And now I've been doing some very, hard sessions. And I think I've never been so ready for these hard things now or before as I was now with just indoor SUP. So maybe it was, I've been paddling so much on water and that was time off more or less. I don't really know that, but it felt that I'm much more controlled when doing things on the water right now. So definitely gonna spend much more with the indoor SUP to train new things.
That's some interesting things to think about there for, like I said, training for several months in indoor SUP and seeing the benefits as you went back in the water again. And
I can take a specific example. I usually do like an impulse-based session. That's normally I do it. There's an impulse. That means an impulse is not more than 10 seconds. So I do this continuously for the whole session. So going all out for 5 seconds and then rest for 7 seconds. That means the resting is, like zone 1 paddling. You paddling very easy, just try to relax, but still moving forward. So for me, it's 5 seconds all out is 7 strokes. So I usually do that for 100 times. But the first session I did, I wanted to see how far I could go. And I actually did 122 impulses. So, and more or less that was from just the base was indoor SUP.
Hmm. It'd be cool to see, like I said, as more people use this to test out theories like that to see whether their fitness has maintained the same or improved, or maybe hopefully not decreased, but even testing themselves, seeing like where does this put me in terms of going back in my training routine again, in terms of taking some time off with just with indoor stuff kind of a thing. So
And here what we usually see when you train something specific, when you do the first field tests afterwards, you usually have gone down. But when you transfer that to water again, the test after that you increase again. You start to see the difference.
Well, thanks, Magnus, for sharing all those incredible thoughts and insights again today. I know for myself, I learned a lot from these conversations, so I appreciate that quite a bit from you. And I think this next session, we're going to do some actual examples of some exercises you can do with indoor SUP. So next week, we'll do that as well. So if you're going to listen to that next week, I encourage you to watch it on YouTube, where you can see what exercises are that Magnus will demonstrate, and have his full setup there for indoor SUP, and show us how to actually use it for some exercises, and use it more properly for what it's intended for. So stoked about that. Super excited for that. But I encourage you guys as well, if you have any more questions for us to answer about indoor SUP, to let us know, as we would love to answer those questions and help you enjoy your time on the water as well. So enjoy the rest of your week, have some fun on the water, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.